there are classic books about dogs, and Winterdance by Gary Paulson is definitely amongst those classics. But it's so much more about dogs, and I don't want to give you a summary of this book because I don't want to ruin it for you. I would be doing a tremendous disservice to anyone listening to this if I was to give you a summary of the story. But I'll say that, every word in this book belongs there. There's nothing needed to be edited or cut out. This book is so rich that you come to know the dogs as if you can feel their fur in your hands when you're petting them. You come to love some of them, to fear some of them, to respect all of them. But this book, Winterdance by Gary Paulson, is one of my all-time favorite books because I feel like it touches me on a level of my soul. And when anything in those rare instances touches me on the to the depths of my soul, that's where the insight comes about. Because after all, why do we read books? I mean, why do I read books? Is it just for entertainment? Yeah, maybe. To pass time? Maybe. To gain information, knowledge, wisdom. But every now and then you read a book that connects with you on the level of your soul, and it does, and that's where the insight comes from, and the profound inspiration. And it's like the door cracks open a little bit and it lets all the light into a room, and that is what this book has done for me. And I remember there was a period where every winter I would read this book. Every single winter I would read this book. And let me tell you how I came to this book. So some years ago, my cousins and I was living in New York City at the time, obviously. Don't live in New York City anymore, and thank God for that. But I was living in New York City at the time, and my cousins and I decided to go snowboarding out in Colorado. And we rented this beautiful place right on the mountain. And after a few days of snowboarding, we were all pretty sore because we weren't doing it all the time. And my cousin, she booked a dog sledding trip for us, just for maybe like 4 or 5 hours. And we went there. And I remember I was in the sled with my cousin Ralphie, who's like a brother to me. We grew up like brothers. And we're in this dog sled, and I'm mushing, which means he's in the sled and I'm on the back of the sled, and the dogs are pulling. And it started to blizzard, but blizzard with no wind. I mean, the snow was just coming down. It was a whiteout. And the silence was so deafening. The depth of that experience, for me and my cousin to share that together with already someone who I was so tremendously close with, but to have that experience, once again, it's like you have these experiences and they touch you on such a level of depth within you. Man, I was ready to give up everything and just dog sled the rest of my life. Obviously I didn't, but when I got back to New York City, I couldn't stop thinking about it. And that's when I came upon this. Someone recommended, told me, they said, Maddie, you should read Winterdance by Gary Paulson. And I remember when I got the book, a friend of mine in the West Village of New York City, he owned a bookstore, and I'd order all. At the time, I was single. I was reading like multiple books a week. And now I hardly read a book. I listen to everything just because I just don't have the time. Or when I do start reading, I fall asleep. And that's, being married, having a farm, having children. It could do that to you. I still love to read. My eyesight isn't what it once was, but I still love to read. It's just easier, I guess, to listen to books. But there is a difference when you read a book. But anyway, my friend Toby, his name was, he owned this bookstore in the West Village in New York City. and I'd order all my books from him. I remember when Winterdance came in, I would take the train. I was going out to New Jersey from New York City. And I think at that time, I was living with my cousin. I was looking after my aunt who had dementia, and that's why I was going out to New Jersey. There was a period where I did live in New York City. That's where my office was for my business. And I had also previously helped my cousin open a coffee shop, but I was going out to New Jersey, and I was so enthralled. I was so captured by this book that I literally missed my stop. And it just dawned on me. So it probably took me, what usually took me about 45 minutes to get out to New Jersey, probably took me like 4 hours. I didn't care. I ended up reading the whole book on the train. I was so enthralled by this book. I mean, like you are in the sled. You are on the trail. You are with the dogs. And you know, this book, it transcends, I think, the narrative of what our lives are with dogs now as pets. You know, in this book, these were not pets. These were part of a team. There was a familial friendship. That's the only way I can explain it, that you have with the dogs. You weren't their tyrant. You weren't their master. You know, there were points where, like, if the dogs got mad at you, they would not get up to mush. They would not get up to work the sled. And there's such a equal bond. And this book really captures that. What this book captures so much. It's so rich. I'm telling you, this book is so rich. So every time I read it, every time I go back to it, it's like a new book. And what brought this man to dog sledding in the first place is like an underlying story. And what I really believe it was just, he just came to the point in his life where he couldn't accept going along to get along. He couldn't accept that he was I'm just doing my job, which I think is catastrophically dangerous, not only for ourselves, but for society in general, when we just do our job. That's a whole another story in itself. But he got to that point, and it appeared from the outside looking in that life would just get worse and worse for him, to the point where the only thing that they had available, the only place that was available to them, was a cabin in the backwoods of Minnesota, with very little funds financially, no car, no jobs, and just the sustenance, I mean, that they had to live off of was fishing, hunting, trapping. And someone had given him a few dogs and an old sled. And with that alone, I mean, that was survival. He needed that for his survival. But the journey that put him on eventually led him to the Iditarod. And if you don't know what the Iditarod, it's a dog sledding race up in Alaska, well over 1,000 miles. I mean, you look into it. If you read the book Winterdance. But if you're not a reader, if you don't want to read the book, I mean, what I'm doing here at this podcast, I got to be honest, I don't even know why I'm doing it, but I love to just talk about these stories that have touched my life, and this journey, and you know, his wife stuck with him the whole time. I mean, they lost everything, you know, in the eyes of the world, and his wife stuck with him the whole time. And I know he also had a son, because he says in the book the best day of his life is when his son was born. And that to me, because I can relate to that, because the best days of my life were when my children were born, and the second best day of my life is when I married my wife. And I've had a really successful life. I had a successful athletic career. I still am an athlete, and I have a successful career as a doctor of chiropractic. I have a successful life doing regenerative agriculture And I mean, my life, and I really believe a big reason for that is because of my belief in God. And trust me, I'm not anything but a holy man. I've made a lot of mistakes and done a lot of horrible things, but I've never stopped believing in God my entire life, because man, I've messed things up. I've messed things up so bad in my life to the point where I should have been taken out. But you know, I really believe that belief and just asking for forgiveness, asking God for mercy. I really believe that life is infinite second chances. If you put to carry your life into a higher power other than your own ego. So here I am sitting out in the woods talking to you about a book, and that's where it's brought me. And to me, that's like, yeah, like that to me is like, I'm honored to be able to do that. Like, my life is so good that I could sit here out in nature and talk to you about a book that has profoundly touched my life. And you know, this man Gary Paulson, another famous book he's famous for is a book called Hatchet, which I think is one of his most popular books. But this book, Winterdance, is, you know, I feel like when you own your own business, you have skin in the game. But I feel like when you have your own children, you have soul in the game. And when this man, the life that he just refused to accept was not because he was some type of degenerate. It's because he had soul in the game. He put his soul in the game, and he trusted that it would work out. And man, let me tell you, financially, these people had no money. But as far as being rich, I would say it would be very hard to have a life richer than what he explains in this book. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible what the bond that's formed between the musher and their dogs. It's absolutely incredible. And the way this man writes, the overall gestalt is so profound. It is, if you ever read 100 Years of Solitude by Juan Markel Marquez, I believe that's his name, I mean, he takes you into the story. You're not just reading a book, you're in the story. And I think Winterdance has done that on a level more than any other book, except one other book. But Winterdance is very positive and very light. It's light. And a friend of mine, he wrote a book called The Dream Merchant, which, I mean, the writing was like, man, elite level writing, but the book was so dark. I couldn't finish it. I mean, the writing though was elite. It was no knock on his ability to write. Fred Waitskin by the way, is the author of The Dream Merchant. But the depth, the dark, that book was dark. But the gestalt, but you know, in Winterdance, the gestalt, like the depth of it, it just touches you, and you are there. You can see the dogs. You could smell them. You could feel the steam coming off the hot meals he would make them at night when they would be out, when we'd be out sledding. And I have a friend that who's a farrier now, and he worked for the Forestry Service, and he told me a story of his story, because he had dogs. He had dogs that he used when he was working for the Forestry Service and living out in a cabin all winter long. And he told me a story once where things went really bad, and he's quite the storyteller. And still to this day, he said he can't have a dog as a pet. And I get that, man. You know, I get that. You know, having an experience that just touches you. I'm going to bring him on to let him tell that story, because it's profound. But going back to Winterdance, by Gary Paulson. I feel like it's so easy. It's so easy to go along to get along these days. And that's never been me. And I've definitely paid the price for that, but at the same time, I think it's made my life wonderful in ways that, there were times, when I've gone low, I've gone really low, but it's all so worth it to live that authentic life. And look, man, there's nothing special about me. I'm not right about all things, certainly not right about a lot of things, some things, but at least there's an authenticity here that I've learned to stay true to, because I see, not only in my own life, but the own lives of others, when that authenticity is sacrificed to loyalty than something other than the truth. And I feel that's so dangerous, not only for ourselves, but for society in general. And this book, Winterdance, is a clear example of someone who was uncompromising in living an authentic life. And man, what a story. What a story. To the depths of your soul. So I hope you've enjoyed my review of Winterdance. If you hit like, hit subscribe. My plan is to do one review a week. Sometimes I'll have friends doing the review with me. Sometimes I won't. And we'll see what happens. But to me, to be able to talk about these books that have touched my life is just, it's a gift. I'm so grateful that I have the ability to do this. So thanks for listening. And I'll talk to you all soon. Thank you. Thanks so much.